Welcome to the 2022 Chess Candidates Tournament. I am Quillogic, and today you're going to learn about the event info, schedule, how these players qualified, and a bit about these players and their chess, as you'll get to see some puzzles from their games. The FIDE Candidates is the most important tournament of the year. The winner moves on to the World Championship match. Only first place matters for this. This year, though, there's an extra layer of intrigue. See, the current world champion, Magnus Carlsen, has announced that he may not defend his title. Depends on who the challenger is. If it's someone from the next generation like Feruga, then he might decide to defend his title. Otherwise, we don't know. If Carlsen chooses not to defend his title, then, unless something changes, the top two finishers of the candidates will play the match against each other. Here's the schedule for the tournament. It begins on June 17th with round 1 and ends on either July 4th or July 5th if there are tiebreakers that need to be played. They'll play 3 games in a row, then a rest day, 3 more, rest day. A rest day just means there aren't any games played, so it's like a day off for the players. Without further ado, let's meet the players. For each player, I'm going to talk a little bit about them, how they qualified, and I'll also put up a puzzle from one of their games that was played on their path towards the qualification. First up, we have Timur Rajabov. He is the wild card. He qualified for the 2020 candidates by winning the 2019 World Cup. He chose not to play, however, due to health concerns regarding the COVID pandemic. To make up for it, FIDE is giving him a spot in this year's cycle. At 35 years old, Rajabov is actually the oldest player in the field. In fact, he played in the candidates almost 10 years ago. In 2013, he finished in 8th place. Right now, he's number 18 in the world, rated 2738, coming off a disaster tournament in Norway where he lost 15 points though. Rajabov made a simply stunning looking move. He went for knight e6. First of all, the reason that you can't take the knight is that the black would take your bishop back. So that's the problem with that move. The move knight e6, it looks like black's just going to take that knight, but it's not so easy. First of all, what happens if black just moves the rook away? Well, now we take, black takes back, and now white's idea is they'll go bishop c5, forking the knight and the rook. Black has to counterattack with their knight. Now take the rook, and at the end, white grabs a pawn, white has the bishop against the knight, an extra pawn over here, and has a good advantage in this endgame. So going back, instead of moving, what if, black actually takes the hanging knight? Or is it hanging? That's the question here. So, first of all, let's see what happens if they take with the pawn. So if you take with a pawn, now guess what? There's another sacrifice. Rook takes f5. Pawn takes f5. You have to take that way since the bishop's lined up there. So pawn takes f5. Now bishop takes e6. Forking the king and the rook. We're going to get it back. But first, let's check there. Now take the rook. Take here. And at the end of the game, at the end of the line, white is up 2 extra pawns over here. And in the game, we're going to see a similar position, but only 1 extra pawn. But still good enough for a win. So back to the start after knight e6. In the game, Liren went for bishop takes e6, but again, we got a sacrifice. Rook takes e6, not a totally real sacrifice since we do win the rook back right away. But the idea is, again, all the way at the end here, white was up an extra f2 pawn, and Rajabov actually managed to convert this quite quickly. Next up, we have Jan Kristofer Daud. Daud is ranked 15th with a rating of exactly 2750. He's 24 years old and qualified by winning the 2021 World Cup, a tournament where he knocked out none other than the world champion Magnus Carlsen in a match. This will be his first candidate's appearance. Now let's see how Daud was able to make such a name for himself at this World Cup. And after the last puzzle where we had a few rook sacks, are you ready to see some more rook sacks? Well, that's right, because Daud began with rook to d7. The idea of this move is, first of all, if black takes the rook, black takes, we take back. Black is up in exchange, a rook for a knight, but the problem is the bishop's hanging, and if the bishop moves, we're crashing through on this f7 square. Knight takes f7, and here black's in big trouble. Black's probably got to sacrifice the rook for their knight, because if they try to avoid that with something else, right now their bishop on g5 is hanging, so if they try to move the bishop, with bishop f6, Well, now we can give a check, knight g5 check with the bishop, and now again they probably need to block with the rook if they don't want to get mated, because king h8, rook h7 is checkmate. So back to the beginning, rook d7. Black should not take this rook, and in the game, Karyakin went for bishop d8. But the point is that now White managed to get this rook into this incredibly strong square on the 7th rank, going after all of Black's weak points. Now White's decided they should move their rook b5, attacking the b7 pawn. Black tries to defend it, but after bishop d5, centralizing the bishop, these pawns are not long for this world, and after rook c7, it was actually allowed Duda to go for quite another nice tactic. Bishop takes f7 check, because once the rook takes, Duda grabs that other bishop and is now up a pawn and was able to win this game. Hikaru Nakamura is number 11 in the world with a rating of 2760, and he is 34 years old. Nakamura is known as the dominant force in online speed chess. However, he's shown that he can still move around the wooden pieces a little bit with his exceptional performance at the FIDE Grand Prix, winning the series and with it this candidate spot. Previously, he played in the 26 candidates, finishing in 7th place. Considering Nakamura's successful career as a streamer, though, only one question remains to be answered. Does Nakamura literally care about the candidates? Well, it should be said that Nakamura certainly cared about this game, because in this position, he found a nice way for a knockout blow against Esipenko in their game in the Berlin Grand Prix 2022. Let's see it. Bishop takes f7, bishop sacrifice. The point is that after Black recaptures this bishop with their pawn, if they take with the queen, we would take, and rook takes the queen. So instead, if they take with the pawn, now we give a check. They have a few options. Again, if they block with the queen, free rook for us. If they move over the king, now we have a nice way to distract this queen away from defending the rook via queen b4. And now if Black takes our queen, we take the rook and then grab the queen, leaving us up points. And if they try to keep everything together, well, the queen can't defend everything at once. Take, queen has to go away, and then we grab the bishop. So back to the game, Esipenko tried to move the king the other way. This, however, did not save him after take, and queen b4 check, forking the king and the bishop after they block. Nakamura grabbed the bishop, has a much, much better pawn structure. Look at all of Black's pawns just completely all over the place. And he's already up a pawn to begin with. Richard Rapport is 26 years old with a rating of 2764. That puts him at number 8 in the world. Rapport qualified for the candidates by finishing 2nd in the Grand Prix and has never played in the candidates before. Rapport is known for being one of the most original and creative players in the game, so can he bring his own spark to this tournament? The position on the screen comes from the Grand Prix finals against Andreikin. He gained many fans in this game by avoiding the possible repetition that could occur after he moves his queen out of danger with something like this, by instead going for the kill. Queen e5. Black moves in the knight, knight d2, attacking the rook, attacking f3, and does Richard Rapport simply move his rook away? No way. f5, pushing forward, going for this attack. Now let's see. Black grabs the material, take, king drops back. Now White comes in with the queen. Check. White grabs the knight, and here White has just a monstrous attack. The queen up there, the pawn getting close for motion, and the bishop will come into the attack soon with bishop g4 to h5. Black desperately tried to give a barrage of checks to end the game in a perpetual, but it did not work. Sacks the rook to bring the queen in, but eventually, after a ton of checks, White's idea is that they just need to bring the queen or the king to a square where the queen will be able to block the checks. And I believe they resigned a few moves earlier, but in any case, this is how the game would have ended, where Black simply has no more checks because all of the squares near the king are guarded. Nepo is number 7 in the world, rated 2766, and is 31 years old. Nepo's first time in the candidates was the 2020/2021 candidates, which he managed to win, giving him the right to face Carlsen in the 2020 World Championship match. After playing very well in the first half of the match, he collapsed in the second half. Will Nepo be able to maintain his peak form that includes his trademark style of blitzing out moves incredibly quickly that makes him one of the most dangerous players in the world? This position is from game 1 of the match between Nepomniachtchi and Carlsen. This position, it's been trending the wrong way for a bit, and it looks like Carlsen's about to put on his own style of an endgame grind. Nepo, however, finds a very strong and instructive plan on how to defend this position. His only idea? Now that it's an endgame, it's time to bring in the king, even at the cost of some pawns. King e2, black brings the rook over, they're ready to open up the file, and even though they win a pawn, Nepo gets in his king, and the king is going to be an important defender of his position. Fabiano Caruana is number 4 with a rating of 2783 and is 29 years old. He's a longtime member of the 2800 Club, and he is quite the force to be reckoned with at the candidates, finishing second in 2016, first in 2018, and fourth in 2020/2021. In his match with Carlsen, he drew every single game and only lost in the rapid tiebreak. Caruana also has the third highest rating of all time, 2851, which he got in 2014. What can I say other than that a fabulous candidate would not be fabulous? This position comes from the Grand Swiss in 2021, where Caruana finished second to qualify for the candidates. This endgame looks kind of crazy with so many pieces hanging, but let's see how Caruana managed the complications. First, if we trade rooks, this doesn't really lead anywhere because after we drop the bishop back, then our knight hangs, and this position should be a draw. We win back the pawn, but material remains even. So back to the start. Another try could be to go for knight takes g6. White can take our rook, but now we move our bishop away. And normally the knight and bishop are better than the rook, but it's difficult for us to make progress after something like this, where now once white puts the pawn on f3, it's really hard to bring in our pieces and go target those pawns. So Caruana found a way to look at this position and make it a favorable version, a similar version, but a better one for black, by starting with the move f3. f3. First of all, if you take the rook, now the pawn takes here and is going to promote, so definitely can't do that. And the point is that once white takes this pawn, now we go into that same line as before, but here, if you compare it to before, now white's structure is totally ruined and black was able to pick up these pawns and win the game. We've reached the player everyone has been talking about. Alessio Feruga is 2793, number 3 in the world, and only 18 years old. In fact, he's the youngest player ever to cross the 2800 rating. He had a dominating performance at the Grand Swiss when he qualified and the European Team Championship that followed it. The only doubt people have is that he's not nearly as experienced as many of these candidates' veterans. Will he put these doubts to sleep? We have a very tense position where it turns out white has a lot of sacrificial opportunities that'll lead to a good position. First, we could go for rook takes e5. When black recaptures, that opens the path for us to fork them now that we got rid of the bishop that was defending. And we win back our material, but by putting a rook on c7, we have two extremely strong pieces, the bishop on d4 and the rook on c7, that are going to give white a great game. Now, another possibility for white was a sacrifice with knight takes g7, king takes back, and following it up with another sacrifice to open up this king and get rid of more defenders by the king. Rook takes e5, knight takes back. Now white goes with the check for the knight to bring in the queen. Now there's an attack on the e5 knight, and when black defends it, white finds a way to bring another attacker into the game with rook c3. With the rook coming over, black's king is in big trouble. In the game, though, Feruga managed to find another sacrifice that was possible here with knight takes h6. His idea was that after black took, we can take the knight, getting rid of a defender of the e5 bishop. So now tries to move the bishop away. Now it trades the rooks. And instead of taking the bishop, Feruga decides to bring in the queen with the idea of the queen can take the knight on f6. But there are quite a few arrows that are about to show you what's going to happen. So black realizes here that this bishop is stopping the king from escaping, which means there could be some back rank mate possibilities. Right now there's a rook here to prevent that, but black can try and distract this rook away. And black managed to find a very strong defensive resource, queen c6. Feruga, though, do you think he's going to fall for your tricks? I don't think so. Bishop c2 back to defend. Now black brings their own bishop back. White finally regains their piece. And at the end of the day, white has managed to win a pawn and was able to win this game. We have reached our final contender for the candidates tournament. Liren is number 2 in the world at a rating of 2806. He's 29 years old. He qualified by rating after Karyakin was disqualified for violating the FIDE Code of Ethics. Liren is currently the only player above 2800, and he has not had the best success in the candidates in the past. In 2018, he finished in 4th. In 2021, he finished in 5th. That being said, Liren's level of play certainly demands respect. In an interview before Ding had secured the spot in the candidate, Carlson said, quote, "He's clearly the best player who's not in the candidates at the moment, except for me, maybe." I decided to look at a game between Feruga and Liren just to give a little taste of what the head-to-head matchup might look like. And so this game was played in the World Cup in 2019, where Liren managed to knock out Feruga. So this position looks like it could be really scary for black, because look at all these pawns near the king, giving white a ton of space. The problem for white is they don't have any pieces over there to help their attack. But black needs to act quickly before white is able to again reroute their pieces for the attack. So black played the very strong move c4, giving up that pawn completely, but Liren's idea is that he's opening up his pieces. The knight is ready to jump into the c5 square and the d3 square, and the queen was able to come to b6, and Liren was able to actually very quickly generate a big attack and won the game. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned, I will be doing recaps after each round of the candidates. And let me know in the comments below, who would you like to see win the candidates?